If your relationships are not prioritized in the order of source, self, spouse, then others, then this episode is for you. Welcome to the Fierce Authenticity Podcast, where we're illuminating and dismantling all of the ways supremacy culture has impacted our relationships with ourselves, with source, and with others. Not just the overt ways, like racism, sexism, ageism, alcoholism, and all the other isms, but also the sneaky, cunning ways you wouldn't have thought of, like perfectionism, imposter syndrome, judgment, burnout, the not enoughs, and the hustle to achieve. I'm your hostess, Sharani M. Batuk, and I'm a relationship therapist, leadership development consultant, and author of the book series, Fierce Authenticity. Whether you're a returning listener or you're new here, I want to extend a very warm welcome to you and invite you to connect with me through the Fierce Authenticity newsletter community. If you're ready to rise above an inherited systematic invasion rooted in fear and lack, so that you can calm and refocus those energies towards reclaiming a fiercely authentic personal relationship grounded in an abundance and love that is so radiant all your other relationships are elevated with you, then this is the space for you. I invite you to visit www.fierceauthenticity.com/connect to join me. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited that you are here and we're back together. I truly hope you enjoyed last week's episode where Christina and I were speaking about human design and how to utilize that as a method and a way to understand ourselves and those with whom we're in relationship. And because we started with the relationships segment of the podcast, I want to continue on that theme and share with you an episode today which speaks about how we prioritize our relationships. As you heard me tease in the intro, if your relationships are not in the order of source, self, spouse, or partner, and then others, things are most likely going to be feeling really out of balance, really out of alignment, and you probably find yourself burnt out, stressed out, overwhelmed, people-pleasing, giving to others at your own expense, bending yourself backwards into pretzels, and all the things. If that sounds like you, go ahead and keep listening in. And you know what? Even if that doesn't sound like you, keep listening in because today's episode shares so many nuggets and wisdom about the burdens that we place on our relationships and putting people in roles where they don't belong, or us getting into roles where we don't belong. And that we do this because supremacy culture has so disconnected us from who we are, who our divine source of something greater than us is, and then from there, how we relate with everyone else in our lives. And that's why I want to share today's episode with you. Now, I have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer that similar to the episode with Christina, this episode that you're going to hear today was recorded about 6 months ago. This was before my second book was edited and submitted to a publisher. It was before all of that. And it was really recorded at a time when I was still processing all of this in terms of relationships and spirituality and supremacy and how they all tie together. And that said, this episode nonetheless has so many truth bombs to share with you. And I have to be honest that the tendency that I have inherited through living under systems of supremacy and supremacy's conditioning wants to tell me not to release this episode out there. It's telling me I have to edit it or re-record it. And you know what? Supremacy culture's perfectionism does not get to win today. And so the episode that you are going to hear is the original episode I recorded for you 6 months ago. And I am not going to be editing out the intro that, went with in sequence with another podcast episode. I'm not going to do all of that for you because, again, that is me letting supremacy culture win. And again, I'm not going to lie to you. I literally sat here with my pen and paper, was going to look for timestamps, and thank God I have enough recovery in my life today to know that, yeah, that was bullshit. Me sitting down to do that, not necessary, because the information is still so crystal clear and so relevant. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter. And then I get to utilize this as an example of how we practice fierce authenticity to bring ourselves back to ourselves rather than falling into supremacy's trap. Because I very well could have re-recorded the episode. And had I done so, you would have missed the nuggets that this episode shares. Or I could have sat here and done all these timestamps. And quite frankly, that's a waste of time also, because again, the information and the content and the energy that came through was so powerful. And so with that, I am going to stop yapping about the episode and just let you listen in, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Please connect with me on Instagram, or even better, in my newsletter community over at www.sharanimpathak.com/connect. And you're going to hear that those are new and different websites. It's okay if you still go to fierceauthenticity.com. It will reroute you to my new website. And with that said, connect with me on Instagram at Sharani M. Pathak. Let me know what this episode did for you, and even what hearing about practical applications of fierce authenticity, like me sitting here and telling you that I almost let supremacy culture's perfectionism win, and then I decided not to. So shoot me a message on Instagram or connect with me in the newsletter community, sharanimpathak.com/connect, and let's have a conversation. With that, here is the episode. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast. I am back, and I hope that you were at the edge of your seat waiting for this week's episode to drop after I shared with you last week where we're headed, what this work is really about, and what you're going to start hearing from me. Because what you're going to start hearing from me is the everyday, subtle, day-to-day things that we don't realize we're doing in our relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the divine power that holds us all. And before I go there and start sharing some of the first truth bombs with you, the first thing I want you to know is that there's this concept of the order in which our relationships belong, like the order in which to tend to our relationships. And so many of us have that order flipped totally upside down, inside out, and sideways. And that order of relationships is source, self, spouse, then others. Only the thing is, most of us, especially us high-achieving, badass, powerful, change-making women, put ourselves last on the list, if we're even on the list. And a lot of times, source? What's that? And we put everyone else before us. And you see, when we do that, we get burnt out, stressed out, and overwhelmed. And quite frankly, that's also when you start to feel really raggedy and torn down and look in the mirror and there's bags under your eyes and all that other good stuff. That's what happens when you've got the order of relationships out of order. And of course, you can take what you like and leave the rest. But what I have come to find to be true is that when tending to and nurturing relationships with Source first, a divine higher power, a God, a goddess, love, whatever you want to put there, that source is that divine source of power, that divine something bigger and greater than us, which holds us all. And then ourselves, because if we're not well and if we're not taking care of ourselves, then we're going to have nothing left to give others in our lives. And I often share about how, when we're not taking care of ourselves and we're that raggedy person with the bags under our eyes and just feeling worn down and not taking care of ourselves, we end up snapping at the people we love, or we start to get resentful at the people we love instead of actually enjoying the relationships that we have with them. And so when you come back into reprioritizing your order of relationships to tend to, first is that relationship with Source, and then is that relationship with self. Because when your self is well, then you can show up for others and you can give from a full cup. And you see, the thing is, your cup gets filled in connection with that source of something greater than us, which is why the whole last 8 episodes or so prior to break, most of those were focused on our relationship with a power greater than ourselves, because we need to have that foundation of a relationship with a power, a divine power greater than us, that source, because that source is what fills our cup, which then can overflow and go to our spouse and our children and our parents and our friends and our colleagues and our coworkers and our teams and the barista at Starbucks. That's how this works. And when you're not tending to your relationships in that order and putting everyone else before you, and then, of course, add in some of those achievements and accolades and all that other stuff that we do and put before ourselves, then you move through the world from just an energy that isn't at its full power and it isn't at its full capacity. And really, it's like running on fumes, quite frankly, or trying to extend that battery. You see that 1% on your phone and you're like, dang it, let's see how long this lasts. That's how most of us are operating in this life. And so when you start to tend to Source and let Source flow into the cup of you, self, that overflows to the relationship you have with your spouse. And then you can be in connection with and in partnership with your spouse or partner in a way that allows for true heart-centered connection. Because one of the biggest challenges that we see in especially romantic partnerships is that we try to make our significant other our everything. And so they need to be our partner, our spouse, our best friend, our lover, our handyman, our plumber. They need to be our everything. And that's too much of a burden to place on one person. And quite frankly, it's really not fair. And that's not their role. That's not their job. And yet, when you're putting them or others before yourself and God and anyone else, then what's going to happen is you're going to try to get something from them. That's the transactional nature that we often experience in our relationships. And when I work with couples in my therapy practice, I hear it all the time when couples, and I kid you not, several couples have said to me that their marriages and their relationships just start to feel very transactional because we're trying to get something from them. And we're not actually connecting on a heart to heart level. It's just going through the day to day, living life, doing the thing, and oftentimes two ships passing in the night where there's not that connection. And I know, and you know, and your spouse knows that y'all didn't get married just to live like roommates, that you got married to share this heart-centered connection, this heart-based connection with another person. But guess what? It's going to be really hard for you to have that heart-centered connection with someone else if you're constantly trying to get something from them that you ought to be getting from your divine higher power instead. Yeah, I'm going to say that again. A lot of times we struggle in our relationships when we are trying to get something from someone, in particular our partners and our spouses, something or some experiences that we instead need to be getting from our divine higher powers. And because one of the things supremacy has done is really damaged the way that we relate with source or spirit or the creator, the divine God, goddess, nature. Supremacy has really jacked that up and led us to believe some really awful things like that God is punishing, or you have to do X, Y, and Z in order to receive God's love or be in God's favor. Or if you've done something wrong, then you've sinned and you're a bad person. All of that shit, quite frankly, is human thought. That is not divine thought. And I have a whole episode dedicated to that earlier on in season 2. And for today, what I want you to know is that because of the way supremacy has really jacked up our view of a higher power, because think about it, indigenous cultures, indigenous peoples, they are in relationship with the land and with the spirit and the animals and the waterways and all of that. And when Euro colonizers arrived to the lands that they colonized, all that went away. They didn't have care and concern for the land. They just came to exploit the land and get what they needed. And so that was, I don't want to say lost, but it got buried really deep within us. And there are those of us who are still carrying on those indigenous traditions and honoring land and the waterways and the people and all beings. And more of us will start to do that little by little. I know that there are more conversations around land stewardship and waterways and all of that. And it's really important and valuable. But it's important to just know that that relationship got bastardized. So we no longer think that we get our fulfillment and our nurturance and our unconditional love and unconditional positive regard from a source of divine love and not just from some other human. So, source, self, spouse, then your children, then your parents, and then everyone else. And if you put your relationships to nurture in that order, you're going to notice a shift. You're going to notice a difference. You're going to start to show up differently. You're going to start to show up as the woman that your higher power wants you to be. You're going to start showing up as your best self and living your most authentic life. Not because you had to do anything, because the doing is the colonizer's way, but because you're getting your direct guidance and your direct cup being filled from a divine source of love. And when you are working towards being the woman that divine power has for you, and I don't say working towards, because I used to say, dear God, help me work towards being the woman you would have me be. And that still has the energy of the doing and the forcing and the hustle. And when I started shifting it to, dear God, thank you for being with me as I continue to walk towards being the woman you would have me be. Gosh, everything just shifted. And I wonder if you noticed it even right there when I said it, because I felt it in my body, that shift of, dear God, thank you for walking with me as I walk towards the woman that you would have me be. Dear God, please help me to be the woman that you would have me be. And those simple phrases and that simple shift, you're no longer going to have to wonder what you have to do to live your best life, or what books you got to read, or what seminar you have to go to. You will simply know who you are, how to show up for others, how to be in relationship. And it'll all come to you with so much ease. And so what I want you to do, well, what I invite you to do over the next week or so, is to think about the order in which you're prioritizing how you nurture your relationships. Experiment with what happens if you put source first and tend to that relationship first. And then you put self second and you tend to yourself second. And then you put your spouse or your partner third. And then you put your kids, the parents, and everyone else after that. Just notice what happens. And also notice what happens if you simply start to ask God, Goddess, higher power, the divine, love, when you ask to be the woman that source of something greater than you would have you be, you will notice a shift. And that shift is what's going to support you in dismantling the conditioning of supremacy within you. Because God, Source, the divine, doesn't operate from the space of supremacy. That's actually the programming that the supremacy would have you believe, which is why the supremacy has created a punishing God. But instead, God is love, and love doesn't operate based on supremacy. So, think about that and experiment with those tiny shifts in your day-to-day and notice what happens. And as a reminder, to support you to deepen this practice, I've recorded a bonus episode of the podcast that you can only have access to if you're in my private newsletter community. So if you're not in the newsletter community, go ahead and hop on over to www.fierceauthenticity.com so that you can start receiving the bonus episodes of the podcast, which are short 3 to 5 minute practices to support you with the weekly solo episodes that I share with you. And with that, have a beautiful and blessed week, and we will be together again soon. I I want to take a moment to honor and acknowledge the amazing support team that helps make this podcast possible for you. Starting with Diego Velazquez, our podcast editor and the talented artist who created our custom music. Ana Olvina, my wonderful assistant who creates all of our beautiful graphics and the transcript of every episode, which you can find over at www.fierceauthenticity.com. Biana Sandich, who writes our amazing show notes and does it so well that I bet you couldn't tell it wasn't me. The talented Jillian at Epoxy Studios, whose photography is our cover art and pretty much every other curated image that you see of me on social media. My husband, who puts up with me when it's 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday night and I'm like, hey babe, I gotta record a podcast episode. Like right now. Is that okay? My higher power, whose divine wisdom flows through me to bring these messages to you. And last but not least, I want to thank you, my listener, so much for listening in. If you'd like to join the podcast support team, some ways you can do so are by rating and reviewing the podcast, sharing it with everyone you know, and, if possible, making a financial contribution through the link in the show notes so that you too can be part of the team elevating this podcast and making it possible to bring to other listeners like you. I'm sending you so much love, and we will be together again soon.